Voiceovers in these color alongs, I did want to kind of explain my process verbally for how I'm going to do this watercolor background. So first off, just to show you the colors that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be using a dioxazine purple, and for any of you who know like pigment value colors, this is PV23. I'm also going to be using Prussian blue or PB27. These are two that come from different sets. This one here is Schmidtke. This one here I think is Winsor and Newton, but those are two of the colors I'll be using, along with quinacridone rose or PV19. All right, so those are the main colors I'll be using from this set. I might also throw in some black, so I have some in a tube from Schmidtke, and I might throw in some white as well. So this is a Daniel Smith white. For other whites, I might throw in some of this Winsor & Newton ink. And to add in some fun golds, I have two different golds from Finetech Premium, and one of them is Sahara Gold and the other is Beach Gold. So you'll of course need some water and some paintbrushes. And the two paintbrushes I'll be using are a flathead brush as well as a round brush, size 12 and size 16, because I own them and they seem to be good sizes. So make sure that you have your page masked off, both with masking fluid and with masking tape, and have some other papers around it for protection like I have. Then you're just going to get started mixing some of your colors, and I have my little blending plate over here. It's like a nice little ceramic one that I got. My idea for the page is for it to be darker on the outside, kind of coming in towards lighter on the inside, but still have like a nice mix of different colors and textures, so that's what I'll be aiming for. So another thing to consider would be ratio of colors, of which colors you want to be predominant. And for me, the colors that I would want to be predominant are purples. You also kind of want to consider how much water you're going to use. Try not to overwhelm the page because it can bleed through, and you are working in non-watercolor paper. So let's kind of get started and see how this goes. So I'm just starting by applying some purples down first because that's like the main color that I want, and then I'm adding in a bit of blue as well. I'm just kind of dabbing it all on to create sort of the different textures that I'm imagining with this particular page. And as you can see, once you blend it a tiny bit with the quinacridone rose, the purple and the rose kind of make a mauve-y color together. So natural color blends and things like that will also happen. The page does dip a tiny bit. I do have a book behind it which I can remove. There we go. So that way if it doesn't like flow towards the
seam of the page, which you really do not want to happen. And add in a tiny bit of black around the edge, but trying not to be too crazy because we do want to make sure that it doesn't bleed through, and also that, again, the purple is preserved as my main color. All right, so I'm switching to my round brush here, and I'm trying to pick up some of this gold, and I'm just kind of like dabbing that in as well and letting that spread out. So that's sort of the gist of how I am going to be creating this page. Slightly terrifying, always to use wet mediums, but also very worthwhile because you can create some really, really beautiful effects with it too. Yeah. So here you can kind of see that because the page itself is uneven and it's buckling there, I'm having some paints that are starting to pool. So I'm actually going to pick that up with my little cloth here, because if it pools for too long, it will bleed through to the other side. All right, so coming in towards more of the pinks around the center of the butterflies. Moving into purples. Just like dab, 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 dab. Add another page here to protect. There we go. All right, and now towards the edges, mixing that with some of the blues. So I'm kind of trying to work light to dark here a tiny bit if I can, and then end with black. Okay, so in that way it's kind of like balanced out. And then take some of my gold. Sorry for the traffic in the background. We have our windows open because it's warmish. So you can hear all the traffic. Yeah, so far I have not used the white or the iridescent medium. Kind of happy with where I'm at. The white can also, because white is more opaque, it can tend to make colors look a bit more gray. Because normally with watercolor, you get things paler by just adding more water. Like white watercolor is not an overly common thing. Yeah, because it desaturates and brings things closer to the grays. So I'm just going to ignore that for now, and instead just kind of concentrate on my pinks, my purples, my blues, and pulling towards my blacks. So here, I'm starting to run a little low on purple, so I'm recreating some. There we go. You can see I already went over the edge there, so it's good that I have my papers in place. And then my blue. And finally some black. Spread that out a bit. Stop some of the buckle bleed through if possible. Add a bit more pink here. see if there's any places that need to be blended out a tiny bit. There you go. Here I'm just adding in a bit more purple because, like I said earlier, I want this to be more of a purple page than any other color. And so the blues and the pinks are kind of like the dark tones and the mid-tones of a purple, I guess you could say, because, I mean, red and blue purportedly make purple. And that kind of like allows for a bit more interest than if I was just to do plain purple in the background. And then yeah, I'm just kind of working it, mixing it with where I think it needs to be mixed a bit. Anytime I see a puddle, I try to like clear out the puddle by blending it out. Anytime I see a weird line like this, I try to blend that out as well. Like I want texture, but I don't want it to look like paint strokes, if that makes any sense. Probably why like people prefer big fat brush ones. Yeah, see this one here, it's too fine, which is why this is a bit better for blending out. All right. And there too. Just trying to get that blended by the things, but the little mothy butterflies. Okay, that to me looks good so far. So now I'm gonna see if I can get some splatters in. So I'm gonna use my Winsor & Newton white ink, and I have not done this very often. I'm wetting another brush, a bit of a thinner round brush this time. And my desk is not protected, so this is gonna get messy, but that's fine. Yep. And then you just kind of like do a little splattery dump. The paint's still wet, so this is gonna bleed out a bit, but that's fine. It's kind of what I'm aiming for. This adds like a ton of extra texture, I guess, to the page, you could say. Yeah, I don't have as much gold in. Let's see if I can splatter in some of this gold. I decided to use the paler of the two gold. Don't ask me why, I just felt like it. Yep, so here I'm just like dabbing it on, I guess. I'm sure that there are better strategies that I could probably look up online for some tutorials for how to do these kinds of watercolor backgrounds. I'm not overly familiar with them, but today I'm just kind of going with what I feel like doing, and that's what this is. Yeah, I think that's fine. So there you go, quick and easy. And I'm gonna add in a bit of black at the edges to darken it out. So I have to add a bit more black to my little paint palette here. I'm trying to keep this relatively thick, so just a tiny bit of water to help the blending. But yeah, there you go. It's kind of thicken out the edges here, because that can help give it some form and dimension if it's dark at the edges, and move lighter towards the inside. I'm probably definitely going to have a lot of bleed through because of this. Often when you're working with watercolors, you want to work with as little water as possible in these coloring books and then add in depth with layers, but it's easier to get texture if it's more wet on wet this way. So I'm pretty sure I'm sacrificing the back page just to get this texture that I'm looking for. There we go. Add in some more black. I'm having this come straight from the tube this time. Just a tiny bit of water. There we go. Tiny bit more here. A bit more here. A bit more there. This needs to be blended out, so I'm using a clean paintbrush to just kind of like help me blend it out a tiny bit. I think that starts to look good. I feel a tiny bit like Nico Simi right now. I don't know if you know her. She's another YouTube colorist. She does a lot of like dark, dramatic pieces. So this is a bit dark and a bit dramatic, so it reminds me of her. Okay, and I think I'm done. All right, shall we see what the damage is? Oh my gosh, almost nothing. All right, well, it's good to know about the bleed through. You can be a bit heavy on this paper and it'll still be fine. All right, so I have my hair dryer. Now I'm going to dry it. So the downside with hair dryers, as opposed to just air drying, is that it does push the paint around a tiny bit. So you can see how when I push it towards this edge, it came across a tiny bit there. And I did accidentally get like a little spurt here, despite my best intentions. But as you can see with this back, it was only really in the process of drying that I got this much here, because my hairdryer shoved some paint aside and then moved the papers because I was being very violent with it, I guess. And this is the only bleed through I had here when I had a tiny bit too much black water in that corner. Otherwise, I just have buckling but no bleed through. So that's good to kind of know about this paper, is that it's not too terribly difficult to work water mediums with. So I just put some water on my cloth and I'm gonna dab at this. You can see it's coming off slightly. It won't be a permanent fix. It'll be kind of annoying now. It's hard to cover up Johanna's papers because it's not, they're not pure white, they're ivory white. And so it's not like you can put a pencil or color on top and it'll just blend out. But there, that's much better. So that way it looks just like a tiny smear. This one I can't do that with because it's permeated and damaged the paper, right? It seeped through. So if I rub it, it'll create a hole. So you don't do that there. You can just slightly wipe away the color if it's dropped there. And even if I want to, right here, have a tiny bit. There we go. See, good as new. All right. So now that I have this side a bit more fixed, it's time to do the same over here. So again, choose a clean portion of your cloth, spray it with a tiny bit of water, and start dabbing slightly so it doesn't get rubbed everywhere. You can see it's coming off on the cloth. And it's the nice thing about watercolors is it is attracted to water, so it can disintegrate into the water a bit too. I am trying to first dab as much as I can, because if you rub, you create more of a smear, versus if you dab, you kind of help it absorb it in where it needs to absorb. There you go. Oops. See, rubbing, smear, bad idea. Oh, I'm so impatient. Dabbing is the worst. All right, dab, dab. All right. So don't go too much. Also, if you rub with wet paper, you'll start disintegrating the paper. So just do it a tiny bit, unless you're silly and just made a smudge. Just to kind of help lift some of it, and without too much trauma that won't start hurting the paper itself. Okay, all right, I'm done. So those aren't too bad. They just kind of look more like smudges now, but because the color is less, it'll be easy to color over them. It just means that I can't, like, if I wanted this to just be a plain background and not have it colored in, I can visibly see that. So it's maybe motivation to actually turn this into a full page spread as well. So coming over here, I kind of do want to accentuate some of these white dots. So I'm going to take my acrylic paint marker and maybe even like a gel pen, see if that works. And kind of in the middle of some of these paler dots, add in like a highlight. And what that does is it kind of makes it look like there's an aura. So you have your faded out white and then bright in the middle. It has a nice glow to it as far as dots go. So there we go. It's like a tiny little dot in the middle of some of those white patches, and I have myself a quick galaxy. Of course, I'm gonna have some areas that I've already masked off, and those will be nice to have white stars in, and some of them are even star-shaped. But this is kind of like the stars of the background of the piece, you could say. All right, so I'm just gonna go around and add in these white dots. Honestly, I'm actually experimenting a bit with this page. Normally, I mean, I'm experimenting with all the pages in this book because it's not like I've done them before. I do them as a color along, but this one's extra experimental. That's okay. Hopefully it works out, and it will. One thing I find with coloring pages is you sometimes have a vision in your mind, and then the final result doesn't look like that vision, and then you think it looks terrible, and you're disappointed in it. But then if you take a break and then you come back to it, you'll realize, oh, actually, it does look nice in its own way. Even if it wasn't what you originally imagined, it's still a pretty page. That's what I feel like about most of my pages, actually. All right, for me, that's going to be enough white dots for now. I'm kind of wanting to center it around the middle and not really have it go to the side here. So let's now come to the second scary stage, which is the removal of the masking fluid. And now I'm going to remove the masking fluid here. I like to use a little rubber eraser guy, and this is just a piece of square rubber. It's a masking fluid eraser, and it has enough tension that it can kind of like pull the sticky masking fluid to itself, and that helps remove it without hurting your fingers from just rubbing away. It helps protect the page too because it's less oily than your fingers and spreads less gunk. So even though it's a bit colored, it has less gunk on it. See, it just kind of like wraps it up. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of white to these stars. So instead of whiting out the center of the stars, I find that loses the definition of the outlines, and then it just looks more like a blob than a star. I'm instead going to draw back in the definition of the stars by kind of like adding more color using my pencils to the outside of the stars so that they can kind of maintain some of that shape and that definition. So I'm going to go grab some of my Prismas. I'm just going to color match as best as I can to the pencil for each star, and then just kind of clean up the edges. Right, now the background's fully complete. Having the pencil work helps clean up some of those lines and just makes everything look a bit neater despite the mess of everything that's thrown there.
pour faire